we're going to move through. We're going to move through right after this, talk about objectives. We're going to define transparent course design in more detail and walk through some of the aspects that make that up. Then we're going to give everybody an opportunity to have a small group discussion where you're going to review some of the concepts and ideas that we talk about as it relates to your work. Then we'll have a share out session and wrap up with some next steps and questions and discussion. And I also wanted to add in here too, that if questions do arise as we move through any of this content, feel free to add that in the chat. We can't promise that we'll get to it right in the moment, but we will have that time at the very end where we'll be able to comb through the chat and make sure that we answer any questions that come up as well. So our objectives today is that by the end of the session, you'll be able to describe elements of transparency in the teaching and learning process. You'll be able to apply principles of transparency to the online course development process, and you'll be able to evaluate course artifacts for transparency. So I will hand it off to Andrew.
All right, so starting off with the definition, we define transparent course design as the process of developing clear, accessible, and equitable courses. So when we're thinking about how we can take that definition and apply it to our processes, one of the most common things that we see is an application for universal design for learning. So considering how students of all abilities are able to access course content, activities, and assessment, and thinking about how you can fit transparent course design into your instructional design process. So a lot of times, if you are working as an instructional designer, thinking about how you can help guide your faculty to using these techniques. And if you're on the faculty side, thinking about how you can create courses that are transparent, that are grounded in UDL and equitable practices. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a review of definitions when you're thinking about your course mapping process. And we think this is especially important because as you're creating your courses, being clear with why students are doing certain tasks is paramount. So as part of this, we want to just run through these statements again that I'm sure you've all seen numerous times, but just making sure that everyone's kind of on board with how we use these terms. So first, you start off with your course goal, and that's your overarching statement to describe what learners will be able to do at the end of a course. Then next, you have your course objectives. So those are your specific tasks that articulate what learners will be able to do at the end of the course. And those can be a little bit vague. We get more specific with learning outcomes, and that's usually where you see Bloom's come into play. Those are specific measurable tasks that contribute towards learning and demonstrate progress towards the course objectives. And how do you measure those tasks? That's through your assessments. So those are your tasks designed to provide learners with an opportunity to practice, apply, and demonstrate progress towards addressing learning outcomes, and can include both formative and summative forms of assessment. And this chart is something that we've worked with that faculty have found very helpful in just articulating what these different dimensions are for course mapping, and also thinking about how you can go about visualizing or presenting these to students and making meaning for these for students. So course goals, the kind of common application is thinking about like your course in elevator speak. So how would you give a definition of your course to someone who's not familiar with your course materials in a 1 or 2 sentence explanation? And that's kind of akin to what your course goal should be. So if we see an application of this, you want to consider again how you're going to communicate this information out to students. And then how do you present course materials and assessments in a way that clearly connects the course goals, objectives, and outcomes to tasks and activities? So last year at Western, we worked on developing out a new TESOL certificate, so teaching English to speakers of other languages. And this is our how we went through the process. We looked at all the different courses that we had included in the curriculum. We started off with a very broad goal, and then we worked down to the program learning objectives. All of our program learning objectives we mapped with both industry standards as well as institutional standards. That's not in this document, but we have another document where we map out those 4 kind of straightforward program learning objectives, and also went through our various institutional requirements for what syllabi are required to show and what students are required to demonstrate to show mastery of those objectives. And then we came out with course learning objectives. And then from there, of course, we have our module learning outcomes. So In this case, we really went down, mapped everything out. And the advantage of this is when students ask why they're doing something, we're able to map any course learning objective back not only to our program learning objectives, but also to what's standard in the field. So that's from both the TESOL International Organization as well as another international organization that provides standards for curriculum in teaching English.
So another really important component of transparent course design is obviously incorporating transparency into your course content creation and curation processes. So we're not sure of everybody's specific role in this room, but Andrew and I are both instructional designers, and we both also teach classes. So we kind of straddle that both of those roles. And I think that regardless of your role, whether you support faculty with their course development and determination of outcomes, and or if you teach courses and with the intention of engaging students and aligning with outcomes, transparency remains one of the most important, if not the most important component of really engaging learners in that space. And another thing I like to add to that pertains to this information is that these principles apply beyond just a general classroom context. You can apply these to trainings, and it has the same, or any sort of context where you are engaging with learners in an effort to help them achieve outcomes. That incorporating transparency, in particular when it comes to content creation, is paramount and extremely helpful, not just for you as an educator or facilitator, but also for your learners. So one of the things that we really emphasize, or that I really emphasize in my work, and that I know is becoming a lot more commonplace nationwide, is the use of open educational resources, or OER, resources. And the reason why these are so important for how we develop out our classes and how we use and recommending to folks as they build out their classes is that it provides course designers with abilities to enhance accessibility. And it also allows subject matter experts to make changes to content and present what they want in a very clear, integrated fashion. So open educational resources are often accessible, and you're able to curate and use those and scaffold them so that you're able to connect specifically with learners in the context in which you're engaging with them in. And that's one of the great advantage of these types of materials versus using like a publisher textbook, because those can actually be quite constricting. And any of you who have maybe utilized those to create a curriculum or teach and incorporate into a curriculum, you may notice or have realized that the way in which the publisher and the authors have curated and designed the flow of that resource can sometimes inhibit your ability to really expand on topics or be creative in a way that allows you to continue to integrate it with that source. So that's one of the great benefits of OER content, is you're able to have a lot more flexibility in the information that you share with students. And it continues this process of having content that is open and accessible nationwide and even worldwide. And another component of effective, transparently designed courses when it comes to content creation is that we allow our learners to read the text and navigate all of the pertinent information inside the LMS. So now I'm speaking directly about courses that are web enhanced or trainings that are web enhanced that utilize a learning management system. So what we're looking at is allowing students, and I'm just going to talk about it from like a faculty member perspective, we're allowing students to navigate the entire learning experience and access their content, whether this is a fully asynchronous class or on the other side of that, it is a fully synchronous face-to-face class that utilizes an LMS. We're allowing them the opportunity to access all of the content in that one place. And I have actually incorporated this into several of my communication courses, as I've adopted an OER text. And what I've done is I have taken the chapters from that text and I have placed them into Canvas. We use Canvas as our LMS, but you can do this in Blackboard or any other LMS. And I have copied and pasted all of that content. Then I've obviously gone through and reformatted it and made it look as nice as I want it to. And also had the opportunity to incorporate models and graphs and videos that I think are pertinent as well, all right there in the course space. So what you're seeing here on the right-hand side is a landing page for one of my weeks and one of my classes, where each of those links where you see it says first learn to understand conflict, that actually links out to a full page within Canvas that is part of a chapter from an OER text I adopted. And then the students are able to read it, and they can read it on their tablet, they can read it on their phone, they can read it on the computer, they can also save it as an HTML page and print it out. They can, they have a lot of different things that they can do with this information, and they're able to do all of it within the course space. And this enhances the student's ability to access the content and find it so they can get down to the business of learning. And we also know that accessibility, relatability, and the diversity in which the diverse way in which we provide materials is very important to our students' success and our learner success. So we want to make content accessible so it's readily available to all students. Then I've talked a little bit about that already. We want content to be relatable, and this is a really big thing. Some disciplines really lend themselves to this a lot easier than others do. Or it seems, I should say, it seems more intuitive that, so I teach communication studies. It's fairly easy for me to create content and activities where students relate the information that they're learning back to their social lives, their family lives, their professional lives, right? That's very intuitive. That's fairly intuitive and straightforward. In fact, that's one of the bases of the actual discipline are those connections that we have with people. But finding ways, regardless of the discipline that you teach, to have students be able to relate to the information that you're sharing and apply it to their day-to-day lives. And then also providing a diverse array of methods for students to consume content. So providing students with readings, giving them videos to view, providing them with the opportunity to talk with their peers, whether that's asynchronously or synchronously, give them the ability to work with their peers on a project, giving them oral presentations, giving them group projects where they work through problems together as a group. And not only do they talk about their product that they came up with as a group, but the process of coming to that product, and you're integrating lessons throughout that. And thinking about that as you provide different advisement on or create your own formative and summative assessments. So another component of transparency is about the assignment and the assessment design. And we know some things to be true about the way in which we design transparent assessments and our assignments. So I've talked a little bit about these, where we know that learners should have access to content all in one centralized location. And this is something I really, when I'm doing my instructional designer role, something I really emphasize to the faculty that I work with is that a student should be able to open an assignment, whether they're opening an assignment in Canvas or on the LMS, or they receive it in a handout, and they should be able to have all of the information necessary for them to understand what is expected of them on the assignment right there. So we're not asking students to go and grab a bunch of resources that were introduced at varying points throughout the quarter or the semester to piece together what we're asking them to do as the assessor. We're giving them all of the information necessary for their success in one space. Research has shown us that if we provide examples of not just exemplary work, because I think that's what a lot of people do, they say, here's an example of an exemplary essay, is actually also providing students with an example of an average assignment, so like a C-level assignment. And something that I like to ask students to do is I give them an example of a C-level assignment, and I ask them to analyze, and they have the rubric and we've talked about the assignment, I ask them to analyze why that assignment would receive a C grade. And I know that may sound like it might be torturous to the students, but actually it's extremely beneficial. And students consistently say that it not only gives them more confidence as they work on their own assignment, but they actually understand the content a little bit better. And that's something that I think is really a great benefit of that. And think about the transparency. You're not hiding anything from them at that point. It's important that they have the ability to see rubrics and review them. And I actually encourage students to look at the rubric before they even begin the assignment, and then use it so they can have an idea as to where they're at. And then give them specific steps so that they know what steps they need to take in order to be successful. So on the right-hand side of your screen here, you see, this is from my Canvas class. There's a model that I use at my college, and it's from research at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, it's called TILT. It's an acronym that is Transparency in Learning and Teaching. And it is a well-researched model for providing students with transparent assessments that give them a higher probability of not just succeeding on the assessment, but actually achieving course outcomes and having an engaged process throughout. So this TILT model includes the purpose, which you can see over here on the right-hand side, where you actually provide students with the importance of why they're doing this assignment in the first place. One of the things I dread as a teacher is being accused of giving busy work. And if that happens from multiple students, I know I have not been transparent, and specifically that I have not told them the purpose of giving the assignment. So that is one of the important pieces of the TILT model. And I encourage all of you to look that up if you're not familiar with it. It's a great model and approach to incorporating transparency into your assessment design. Then the other two components of it are task, which gives students specific steps that they need to take to be successful on the assessment, and then a criteria for success section. And the criteria for success section is probably the most open to interpretation in terms of what you want to do for your assignment. But what I do is I give the students a template for, if it's a paper, so they can see what they need to fill out in order to be successful, or the order in which I want them to present things. And then of course, I encourage them to access the rubric. So that's a really quick run through of that model, but I strongly encourage everybody, if you're not familiar with it, to look at it. You can just Google TILT model and it'll bring up a bunch of information for you. So we recognize that we just ran through a lot of content as it relates to designing transparent courses and assessments. But what we want everyone in here to have the opportunity to do is to take a look at your own work and what you do either in your classroom and or in your support of faculty and their work in the classroom, to think about the transparency that you have in your courses and your assessments and how you can build from there. So here's the logistics. Each group, and we're going to put you in like groups of 2 or 3. So it's just going to be, it's intimate, it's small. It's not meant to be this huge cluster of people. So each group will have about 18 minutes to discuss the questions on the next page in a Google Doc that we'll link to in the chat. And we'll have you in about groups of 3. And what we want you to do is identify a group speaker for the large group discussion, because we'll have a quick report out session at the end of this. And that set, you'll have about 2 to 3 minutes to report out. And by the way, all of these instructions are on the Google Doc, so take a moment to review those again. We'll ask that you identify a scribe to document your experiences in the Google Doc that we're about to drop into the chat. And we ask also that, given the time limitations, that you keep discussion succinct, and part of that is respecting each other's time, but also when you share out, please being cognizant and limiting it to about 2 to 3 minutes. That way we can hopefully get to everybody in good time. Yep. And then so we have this sort of time layout. Again, being transparent, right, about our expectations and what we want you all to engage in. Again, about 18 minutes to discuss the questions that are in the Google Doc. And as you can see here, we have it kind of laid out in terms of what we want everyone to think about in terms of timing. A minute for your introductions, and about 2 minutes for folks to share their experience, their artifact, and what they want to work on in terms of enhancing their transparency. And then just a couple of minutes to plan for the key takeaway at the end of that conversation. So we've dropped the link to that in the chat. So feel free to open that up. And then you'll be able to coordinate with your teammates once we create breakout rooms for all of you.
And the number of your breakout room corresponds with the number of the group that is on the Google Doc. And also, as expected, as soon as we mentioned breakout rooms, our attendance dropped by 2/3. So we appreciate you sticking around for
Yes.
a discussion group activity. So we're going to go ahead and create this, the groups, but we want to make sure it looks like 2 people have opened it, that everyone has a chance to open it up, or at least 1 person per group, so that you can document your ideas. So feel free to open that link that we just dropped in the chat, and then we'll make sure that that gets sent, that everyone has access to that, so we can begin this activity. All right, we're going to go ahead and create the breakout rooms. If you have any questions, feel free to ping us, and we can jump into your session. All right. Dina and Mike, are you able to join your breakout sessions? I think we are. All right, welcome back, everyone. So from the breakout rooms, we ended with 2. So from room 1, what we'd like you to do is go ahead and do a quick one idea or takeaway per group. So just something that you learned, something that you're going to work on, and giving everyone about 2 to 3 minutes per group. And then we're going to launch into just open question and answer. So from room 1, do we have a volunteer?
Yes, absolutely. So our key takeaways were reiterating the importance of understanding the first steps of content creation. So really around forming measurable learning objectives, really having a needs analysis, and coaching subject matter experts on the importance of why you would want to use those. And then also that transparency in general can help us come up with creative solutions for course development, and especially during times of transition within a program.
Fantastic, thank you. Now from group 2, or sorry, room 3, because yeah, room 3.
I think that was us.
Yep.
It was kind of like, what room am I again? I forgot already. So we talked a little bit about more of identifying the outcomes and really making sure that our goals or our skills that we wanted them to learn were identified and really organized and throughout the whole course. And then kind of how we get there with our directions and our guidance and our consistency, and then also not being so consistent and redundant that it's a boring course. To remember to have fun, that don't take yourself too seriously, mix it up with some different ways to interact and connect, and make that a engaging experience where it's more applicable or active learning. So we talked about ways to do that, and just kind of have a balance in the course.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so next steps, something that we like to just always prompt people with is what ideas will you incorporate into your work from transparency in teaching and learning? So just something that you can think about as you're moving forward, thinking about what you're currently doing, how you can continue to make changes, and just continue to keep, I guess, investigating and being better at what it is that you do. So with that, we have just over 5 minutes left, and we would like to open it up to questions, discussion, anything you want to chat about. We had some other people join us towards the end there. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time for those.
I will say, I think one of the things that was just brought up that resonates a lot with me is that this process, especially when you're looking at mapping, can feel, because I've done this before, and it sounds like a lot of us have too, where you're developing a map, an outcome map, and you're figuring out where things align in terms of your content and your assessments. And it's easy, at least I've experienced this, it's easy for it to feel like you're stifling a lot of creativity because you're trying to align it so intentionally that you sometimes feel like you're removing any of that spontaneity that can come out in the classroom, where I think that's one of the beautiful pieces of teaching, is when those moments happen, or you do deviate from what you are working on or talking about to emphasize something else. So I really appreciate what the second group shared, because I think that it's important to recognize that this process, while we're talking about the importance of transparency and alignment, it's still about human beings. And so allowing that authentic process to kind of unfold, and recognizing that even in those moments and in those events, it's possible to realign your course even in conjunction with those. And those can be some of the best learning moments for us as teachers, and also for learners and for students alike. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in here and just say it's not a linear process, right? And maps in general aren't linear either. And I think to think about it as a linear process is really limiting. And if you need to step away from backward design, and you have a really cool idea, or a subject matter expert's really passionate about a certain thing, get creative about how to fit it in and how to make it work, right? Because that's where the beauty of it comes through. And you want to keep that passion flowing through the course, because the students, they recognize it and they feed off of it.
Definitely.
Just to kind of piggyback off that, I think also recognizing every semester your students' interests and backgrounds change, and finding what they are passionate about and trying to adapt and make that applicable to the course, it really adds a level of excitement that you can't always replicate. Just because I like to watch shoe shining videos doesn't mean everybody else does.
Yes, that's very true. I think that's one of the important pieces of kind of getting a sense of the terrain every time that you re-enter that classroom, and getting a sense of what your students, what are their backgrounds, what are they interested in. And that's why I think, we talk a lot about the importance of introduction assignments, like whatever that looks like, if it's a discussion, if it's a presentation, if it's a conversation, like whatever that looks like. But I think if you're teaching a class or facilitating a session where you're going to have continual rapport with the people who participate, I think one of the best things you can do just for yourself even is to get a sense of where people are at and what they're coming from. And then, having that flexibility and that adaptability to change around, like you're saying, like maybe some people are interested in shoe shining, and that's great, but maybe some people find it profoundly boring. So, got to find a way to kind of pull people in. And I think any opportunity that you have to have an assignment or an activity or a discussion that gets people to talk about what they're interested in, even if it isn't related necessarily to the class, it gives you a chance to kind of adapt and shape what you do and how you communicate to those experiences and preferences.
Yeah, and one model I've seen of that in action is having more modules than you need for a course, right? Like having 17 weeks of material developed for an 11-week course, and then folks at the start of the term get to vote on which of those 17 they want in their 11 weeks. It's a lot more work on the front end, but for those professors or those subject matter experts who have too much material, it's a great way to utilize that and then also give that freedom of choice to the learners.
I worked on a couple of years ago a project. It was a redoing Comp 101 at an institution. And we did a similar thing where we had 10 modules that had to be reviewed during the 15-week semester. And then we had another 10 that the faculty and students got to pick from. And that ended up being very successful just because they had, the core concepts and objectives were met in the 10, and then they had those additional supporting modules. And that was something that just really, that really resonated with both students. And that class was primarily taught by graduate assistants. So they appreciated having a little bit more flexibility in picking and designing the course, kind of making it their own. So it's a fantastic idea.
And not to be the party pooper, but as a moderator, I have to let folks know we're wrapping this up. So great conversations. And we do have the Discord channel if you want to meet there and continue on. But I do need to get this room closed for the next session.
All right.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. And thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.